I want to hear is I want to see people raise their hands, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take 4 questions. Now, I know these all 4 questions turn into 18 questions, but that person asking the first question is always somebody, they're shy, they don't want to do it, and if you don't do it, I'll just call on you. So who has any questions about multiple sclerosis? Let's go with you.
What do you feel about the swine flu vaccine if and when it becomes available, and considering also that most of us are seniors?
Okay.
That's different.
Okay. Now, I recognize that this board I'm writing on, firstly, it's very hard to see. It'll be very hard for you to see from there, but I am going to write down the questions. We write down the questions because when somebody asks something, you should write it down. Also, it gives you a chance to see my handwriting, and also it reminds me. So let's write here, vaccine. Now, anybody that knows my handwriting knows that that's the neatest I've ever written. You know, when you go to Catholic school, they hit your hand with a ruler if you don't write neatly. When you go to doctor school, if you write neatly, they hit your hand. So let's hear some more questions. I think I saw a hand. Yes? Yes?
How do you know that you've gone from relapsing MS to secondary progressive MS?
Okay. So what we're going to explore is how do you know what type of MS you have or when you move from relapsing to secondary progressive. Okay.
I'm behind you, honey.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I read an article that they're testing a new drug again called Gift 15. Have you heard that?
Yes.
And could you address that?
Sure.
And I have another question too.
Well, let's just see if somebody back there's somebody who was raising their hand.
Yeah, I think mine was
Over
the
here.
same one as hers about the new drug that they just walking.
Right.
It's Fampridine.
Okay, so the question in the back of the room was about Fampridine-SR. It's also called Amaya. Okay, well, I have no more room to write, so we'll get to the other questions afterwards. So if you want, you can write them down. Another thing you should definitely write down is if you write on those evaluation forms, besides saying that I did a great job and I have a nice suit and all those nice things, if you write down your email address, I'll add you to our email listserv. So who doesn't have an email address? Who remembers aerograms? Did they used to have aerograms in America? So my family's South African, and my brother's African American because he was born in Cape Town, and he's now American. So it's true. He never did that on his applications, but maybe he should. So my grandmother used to always send us aerograms, and aerograms are like the old penny postcards. Basically, the idea is you actually folded the paper, so there was no envelope, so it was cheaper, and you bought it, and it was already stamped in a way. So she would always send us what, now looking back, were really morbid stories. I mean, she wrote to us about how in one of the national parks a rhinoceros gored a person. She would talk about lions eating people. You know, if you think about it, this is kind of frightening. It's like Grimm's Tales for a small child. But now that she has internet, she has emails, she's telling me other types of scary stories because there's a lot of unrest and violence there in South Africa. But I think about it, I think that aerogram has turned into this electronic gram where it happens. So let's start with the first question. So the first question is a very common question and a question that's very timely. So one of the things is I'm developing right now are recommendations or guidelines about the flu vaccines. So how many people here have had the seasonal flu vaccine this year? How many people here have had the H1N1, unfortunately called the swine flu vaccine? Wow. Okay. Well, I think your hands went up because you don't think it's available in Florida. In Florida, there's about 25% as compared to what it is. And if you're looking for it, actually, most people don't realize that, but if you go to the local Department of Health, they actually do have it. They're just not advertising it. We were supposed to, by now, have received a couple hundred, because that's something we're going to offer at Neurologique. We're just going to give it to people so they don't have to go to CVS or Walgreens. So, or any of the other places. That wasn't a commercial for either of those two. Sorry, what did you say? Okay. So if you think about the vaccine, so what is the H1N1 vaccine? There's two types. There's the injection, and anybody with MS ever heard of injections? So there's the injection, and then there's also this one that's a nasal spray, and it's called flu mist. And the injection is a dead vaccine, meaning that there is no live virus. It's just particles of the actual virus. And then the nasal spray is a live attenuated. So attenuated means that it's weakened. So you're not giving yourself the full flu, but you are giving yourself a live virus. So the question we'll start with first is why would you use one or the other? And then what are the recommendations if somebody has MS and also depending on the age? So why should anybody take a live attenuated virus if there are potentially more immunological problems? And when I say that, if you think about other live attenuated virus, we sometimes see something called ADEM, so acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, which is a demyelinating disorder of the brain and spinal cord. Somebody with MS already has hyperimmunity, and the question is why you would want to expose them, and also, could these vaccines cause an MS relapse? So, the American Academy of Neurology is connecting with the CDC to look at the question of vaccines and to recommend the H1N1, because if you don't take it, if you're not protected, there are potentially risks. There have been children who had seizures and had confusion, etc., with the actual flu, with the actual flu and without the vaccine. So when I asked the question, I said, yes, but why would you ever have the live attenuated? Because you can cause a neurological problem, potentially. And the people answered back, oh, there's been guidelines. So I looked at those guidelines again. Those guidelines, a lot of it says, well, there's no evidence either way, so there's no recommendation. Well, thank you very much for that guideline. That really helped. And then at the end it says, each individual patient should talk to their doctor, and it's individual. Thank you very much for the guidelines. Most MS experts would really try to avoid giving people with MS a live attenuated virus. So I don't really know why somebody who's an adult would take live attenuated, especially when there are papers that show that you have better protection from a dead virus than a live virus. And there's more risk with the live. That's true for adults, but for children, for young children, we think that a live attenuated is more protective, and also they don't have to have a shot. So people with MS, certainly, I think if they're going to take a type of vaccine in general, it should be a dead vaccine, and it shouldn't be live attenuated, so none of those nasal sprays. And like I said, people with MS, for better or for worse, are usually used to needles, and that's not even a problem. You could actually walk into one of those doctor's offices and say, oh, we don't need somebody else to give it, I'll take the needle myself. And if you want, we thought about actually having people with MS volunteer, because that's one of the problems, is the government is giving the vaccine for free, and so it's not like normal billing, so people come to a doctor's office and it's almost like volunteering. They can bill potentially for the actual administration, but it takes up a lot of time that could be used for actually seeing patients. So they need more doctors and places to give the vaccines. So I thought, well, besides me personally giving it, why don't we get some people with MS to volunteer? People with MS might not necessarily have a nursing degree, but they might be able to volunteer and be able to give those injections. So that's something we're exploring once we get the actual injections. The other group of people I don't think should get the flu mist are people with migraines. Because you start squirting up something to the back of your nose, a lot of times you're going to trigger a migraine, so it doesn't seem to make sense.